Jenny is staring at paperwork she was never supposed to find, and within seconds, one terrifying possibility changes the meaning of her entire marriage. At first, she thinks she has misunderstood what she is reading. Then, she sees Sumit's name. Then, hers. And then she sees the language she cannot explain away. Separation, divorce, and enough legal-looking detail to make this feel like much more than an angry thought after a bad argument. But the most devastating part is not that Sumit may have questioned their marriage. It is that Jenny apparently had no idea he had reached this point. She thought they were dealing with stress, family tension, arguments, different expectations, problems that hurt, but problems you keep fighting through because both people supposedly still believe in the same future. Meanwhile, Sumit may have been quietly trying to understand what life would look like if that future ended. So Jenny asks him the question that changes everything. Were you really going to end our marriage without telling me? Sumit does not answer immediately. And that silence is almost worse than hearing yes. Because Jenny is no longer only wondering whether her husband wanted a divorce, she is wondering whether Sumit had been privately deciding the future of their marriage while she was still living inside it, believing they were working on things together. Then Sumit gives her the explanation he thinks should calm everything down. He says the papers do not tell the whole story. He says he never made the final decision to leave. And most importantly, he claims that by the time Jenny discovered what he had been doing, he had already decided divorce was not what he wanted. But that does not solve the problem. It actually creates a bigger one. Because if Sumit secretly considered ending the marriage, secretly explored what ending it would involve, and then secretly decided to stay, when exactly did Jenny get a say in any of it? That is why this fictional situation is much deeper than Jenny found divorce papers. The papers are only the evidence. The real story is how two people can apparently be living inside the same marriage while experiencing two completely different versions of it. And the warning signs start before Jenny ever discovers a document. Sumit becomes quieter, not dramatically. There is no suitcase sitting by the door, no giant confrontation, no announcement that he has stopped loving Jenny. Instead, there are little changes. Jenny brings up the future, and Sumit seems distracted. She asks what is wrong, and he gives her an answer that does not really answer anything. She wants reassurance. He wants the conversation to end. And because Jenny loves him, she initially gives him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he is stressed. Maybe family pressure is getting to him. Maybe he needs space. Maybe another serious conversation will only make everything worse. So Jenny gives him room. And here is the first cruel irony of the story. The space Jenny believes might help their marriage may be the same space Sumit uses to imagine leaving it. That is where their emotional pattern becomes more important than the paperwork. Jenny reacts to uncertainty by moving closer. She wants answers. She wants reassurance. She wants to know they are okay. Sumit appears to react to pressure by moving away. He gets quieter. He processes privately. He avoids conversations he believes could become another fight. So the more Jenny senses him pulling away, the more reassurance she wants. The more reassurance she wants, the more pressured Sumit feels. Then he pulls away even further. Jenny sees that distance and becomes even more afraid. And before long, neither person is actually dealing with the original problem. They are only reacting to each other's fear. That is a dangerous relationship cycle, because both people eventually feel justified. Jenny can say, I keep asking because you keep shutting me out. Sumit can say, I keep shutting down because you keep pushing me. Both statements can contain truth. Neither one fixes the marriage. And this is why I think emotional withdrawal can sometimes be more dangerous than an explosive argument. When two people are arguing, at least both people are still in the conversation. They still want the other person to understand something. Withdrawal is different. Withdrawal can mean one person has started having the most important conversations entirely inside their own head. Jenny thinks Sumit needs space. Sumit may already be asking himself, can I actually stay married? Those are completely different realities. Then Jenny finds the paperwork. The discovery does not hit her all at once. That actually makes it worse. First, there is confusing legal language, then familiar names, then marriage information, then words connected to separation, and eventually, divorce. Every new detail pushes the situation further away from something she can explain. This is not just Sumit saying, "I'm done," during a terrible argument. He appears to have taken some practical step toward understanding what ending the marriage would involve. And that distinction matters. Almost anyone in a struggling relationship can have a dark thought. "I cannot keep doing this. I need a break. Maybe we should separate." That does not automatically mean the relationship is over. But there is a difference between imagining an exit and starting to measure the doorway. There is a progression. You become frustrated. You wonder whether separation would be better. You start thinking seriously about divorce. Then you ask what divorce would involve. At some point, private doubt begins turning into practical preparation. And Jenny now has to figure out where Sumit crossed that line. Her pain is not necessarily that he had doubts, it is that he apparently traveled much further into those doubts than she knew. Jenny thought they were both trying to solve the marriage. Sumit may have been investigating what happens if the marriage cannot be solved. That creates an enormous information imbalance. One person knows the relationship is close to the edge. The other person thinks they are still several steps away from danger. And when only one partner understands how serious the crisis has become, the other partner cannot meaningfully participate in fixing it. Jenny has been making emotional decisions based on one version of reality. She is choosing to stay, choosing to trust, choosing to plan, maybe making sacrifices for the future. But Sumit apparently had information Jenny did not have. He was considering whether that future should exist at all. So Jenny asks the question anybody in her position would probably ask. If you were unhappy enough to start researching divorce, why were you still behaving as though we had a future? And Sumit gives the answer that makes perfect sense to him and almost no sense to Jenny. "I never said I was going through with it." That distinction is the center of Sumit's defense. He says he was exploring, thinking, trying to understand his options after a terrible fictional fight. He had not made a final decision. In his mind, researching divorce is not the same as choosing divorce. And technically that is true. But emotionally, Jenny is hearing something else. She is hearing that Sumit had one foot outside the marriage while she did not even know the door was open. That leads to one of the biggest questions this fictional storyline raises. When does thinking about divorce become betrayal? Having the thought? Probably not. People can have terrible thoughts when they are angry. Talking to a trusted person? Still not automatically betrayal. Trying to understand what divorce would mean? Now the situation is becoming more serious. Preparing paperwork? That is where many people would say the emotional meaning changes. Because the deeper you move into practical steps, the less convincing "I was only thinking about it" starts to sound. Jenny sees evidence of movement. Sumit sees evidence of uncertainty. He says confusion. Jenny hears calculation. He says he needed clarity. Jenny hears secrecy. He says he had not decided. Jenny's response is obvious. Then why did you need the paperwork? And Sumit does not have an answer that can undo what she has already seen. Then, Jenny asks the question that opens an entirely different wound. Did your family know? Sumit hesitates. Now divorce is not the only problem anymore. Because in this fictional setup, Sumit admits he had discussed his fears with a family member before Jenny understood how serious those fears had become. And this is where context matters. Talking to family is normal. People need support outside their relationships. Sometimes you need someone who is not emotionally involved to help you think clearly. So I would not automatically say Sumit talking to family means someone was secretly controlling him. That would be too easy. Sumit still owns the decision. But Jenny's reaction would probably be much more emotional than that. Because for her, the issue is not simply you talk to your family. It is someone outside our marriage knew our marriage might be ending before I did. That is a very different accusation. And considering how emotionally loaded family influence can become in relationships, Jenny may immediately start wondering whether history is repeating itself. Who knew? How much did Sumit tell them? How long had they known? Did they think divorce was the best option? Did anybody encourage him? Did they know he was looking into paperwork? Even if the answers are completely innocent, Jenny now has questions she did not have yesterday. And that is what secrecy does. It creates suspicion beyond the secret itself. A hidden conversation produces 10 new imagined conversations. A hidden doubt produces 10 new doubts. Jenny may even start wondering whether she was the last person in the room to understand her own marriage. That feeling can be humiliating. Sumit would probably push back. He could say, I was asking for advice. I was not asking someone to decide for me. And he would have a point. Seeking advice is not surrendering your decision-making. But Jenny's argument would also remain strong. There is a difference between getting emotional support and allowing everybody except your spouse to understand how close your marriage may be to ending. That is why Sumit cannot hide behind family pressure. If he considered divorce, that was his choice. If he researched it, that was his choice. If he decided not to tell Jenny how serious things had become, that was also his choice. Family may influence the atmosphere, but Sumit still has to own his communication. And eventually, Jenny reaches the question underneath all of the others. Why? Why was divorce even on the table? Sumit says the doubts had been building longer than Jenny realized. The same problems kept returning. The future. Responsibility, family tension, different expectations, repeated disagreements, and finally, the question that can quietly destroy a marriage even when love is still present, is loving somebody enough if being married to them keeps feeling exhausting? Sumit says he still loves Jenny, and that probably makes her even angrier. Because from Jenny's perspective, love and divorce should not be sitting in the same sentence. If you love me, why were you preparing to leave me? But relationships are not always that simple. Love and stability are not the same thing. Somebody can deeply love their partner and still be emotionally exhausted. And they can desperately want the marriage to succeed while also doubting whether it realistically can. They can imagine losing someone and feel devastated while still thinking separation might eventually become necessary. Love answers, do I care about you? Marriage has to answer many more questions. Can we communicate? Can we solve conflict? Can we survive outside pressure? Can we manage responsibilities? Can we trust each other? Can we create a future that works for both people? That is why Sumit saying, I still love Jenny, does not prove he never considered leaving. And considering leaving does not prove his love was fake. The betrayal is somewhere else. It is in how far the doubts progressed before Jenny understood they existed. Jenny did not get a chance to address the full problem. Maybe Sumit gave her a softer version. I'm stressed. I need space. I don't want to argue. Meanwhile, internally, he may have been asking whether the marriage should survive. That is a huge gap between what one partner knows and what the other partner knows. Now, Sumit's reasoning is not impossible to understand. Maybe he thought, why terrify Jenny with divorce if I might change my mind tomorrow? Maybe he believed telling her would turn a private doubt into an irreversible crisis. Maybe he wanted to understand his feelings first. People do deserve some private emotional processing. A healthy relationship does not require reporting every passing thought. But there is a line. At some point, private processing becomes something that directly affects the other person's life. And practical divorce preparation probably gets very close to that line. Jenny did not need Sumit to announce every moment of frustration. She needed him to say, I am struggling badly enough that I am genuinely questioning whether this marriage can continue. That would have hurt, but at least it would have been honest. Jenny would have been participating in the reality of her marriage instead of discovering it afterward. And that is the real contradiction in Sumit's behavior. He may have kept the truth from Jenny because he wanted to avoid causing unnecessary pain. But now, the secrecy itself becomes the most painful part. Jenny asks him the question that destroys his entire defense. If I never found those papers, would you ever have told me? Sumit does not immediately answer. And in a moment like that, hesitation becomes an answer of its own. Maybe he would have told her eventually. Maybe he had already decided it no longer mattered because he chose not to leave. But Jenny does not know. And once she realizes she may never have been told, she begins questioning everything else. When Sumit reassured her, did he mean it? When he discussed their future, had he already started imagining divorce? When they had a good day together, was he still privately deciding whether to stay? When he said everything was fine, was he protecting her feelings or hiding the truth? This is where discovering one secret starts rewriting an entire relationship, and that can sometimes be more damaging than the original secret, because secrecy travels backward. A quiet night that used to feel peaceful now looks suspicious. A period of distance Jenny once dismissed as stress suddenly looks intentional. A reassuring conversation starts sounding rehearsed. She begins mentally searching the past for clues. That is what broken trust does. It turns memory into an investigation. You can destroy the paperwork. You cannot easily destroy that doubt. Then, Sumit reveals the twist he probably believes changes everything. He says he had already decided not to move forward. Before Jenny discovered anything, he had chosen the marriage. He considered divorce. He tried to understand what it would mean. Then he imagined actually losing Jenny and decided that was not what he wanted. From Sumit's perspective, that should matter. He had doubts and still chose her. Maybe, in his mind, that proves commitment. He reached the edge and stepped backward. But Jenny sees the exact same sequence and experiences it as betrayal. Sumit privately questioned the marriage, privately explored ending it, privately decided to continue it. Jenny only received the final answer. That is not partnership from her perspective. Sumit says, I chose us. And Jenny's response gets to the center of the entire story. You decided whether we had a marriage without me. That is the emotional payoff, because it reveals that they are arguing about two different things. Sumit is focused on the outcome. Jenny is focused on the process. Sumit says, but I stayed. Jenny says, but I didn't know you almost left. Both statements are true. And unless they understand why those statements feel so different, this relationship is going nowhere. Imagine Sumit's version. You have an awful fight. You are overwhelmed. You start seriously questioning whether staying married makes sense. You seek advice. You research your options. You think through what separation would actually involve. Then your emotions settle. You realize you love your wife. You realize divorce is not what you want. You choose to stay. And because the crisis has passed, you decide there is no reason to reopen the wound by telling your spouse how close you came to making a decision you now regret. In that version, Sumit may genuinely believe he protected Jenny. Now imagine Jenny's version. Your husband was worried enough about your marriage to start researching divorce. Another person knew. Possibly a family member knew. You did not. He then decided on his own that the marriage should continue. You never got an opportunity to understand how serious the problem had become. You only find out accidentally. In that version, Sumit did not protect Jenny. He excluded her. That is why, if this fictional storyline actually played out on television, I think the audience would split almost immediately. Some viewers would be firmly on Jenny's side. They would say thinking about divorce is one thing, but practical preparation crosses a line. Those viewers would probably argue that once Sumit started asking serious questions about ending the marriage, Jenny deserved to know the marriage was in that much trouble. A section of viewers might even say Sumit emotionally ended the marriage in private and then simply reversed his own decision before Jenny found out. Their argument would be simple. You do not get to privately decide whether a two-person marriage continues and then call that commitment. But another section of the audience would probably defend Sumit. They might say every married person has thoughts they never act on. People seek advice. People research possibilities. People question relationships. Those viewers would focus on the fact that Sumit ultimately did not choose divorce. They may say telling Jenny the moment the thought entered his mind could have created a crisis that did not need to happen. And honestly, there is something valid in both positions. Then there would be the third group, and I think this is where the deeper analysis sits. The papers are not the original problem. They are the receipt. Something happened emotionally before the paperwork ever existed. Sumit reached a point where divorce became realistic enough to explore. Jenny did not know the relationship was there. That communication failure is the real danger. Destroy the papers and it remains. Sumit says, I'm staying. The underlying problem remains. Jenny forgives him. The underlying problem remains. They have one good week. The underlying problem remains. And that becomes extremely important if they try to stay together. Because Jenny is not going to experience Sumit's future behavior the same way anymore. Before this discovery, Sumit getting quiet might mean he is tired. After this discovery, quiet might mean divorce. Before this, Sumit needing space might mean he wants to calm down. After this, Jenny might wonder whether he is privately planning another exit. Before this, a conversation with family might feel normal. After this, Jenny might wonder, what do they know that I don't? That is how one secret can become a permanent third person in a marriage. And Sumit may eventually become frustrated by that. He might say, how many times do I have to tell you I stayed? Jenny could say, how do I know you are not secretly changing your mind again? Then, Sumit feels accused. He pulls away. Jenny sees him pull away and becomes more anxious. She asks more questions. Sumit feels pressured. And suddenly, they are right back inside the emotional cycle that may have started this problem. That is why their long-term issue is not really divorce. It is fear. Jenny responds to fear by moving closer. Sumit responds to fear by moving away. The more she moves toward him, the more he may feel crowded. The more he moves away, the more she feels abandoned. Eventually, Jenny feels like she has to chase reassurance. Sumit feels like he has to escape pressure. That combination can turn even small disagreements into evidence that the relationship is failing. And this is also where Jenny would have to ask herself a very uncomfortable question. Does she actually want complete honesty? Because complete honesty can be painful. People say, just tell me the truth. But imagine if Sumit had sat down before any paperwork existed and said, Jenny, I am seriously wondering whether we should get divorced. Would that conversation have become productive? Would Jenny have been able to hear that without feeling abandoned immediately? Would Sumit have felt safe explaining his doubts? Or would the conversation have exploded so badly that both of them became even more convinced the marriage could not survive? We cannot know, because this storyline is fictional. But the question matters. That does not excuse Sumit hiding something this serious. It simply means fixing the marriage requires more than Sumit promising he will never secretly explore divorce again. Jenny also needs to know that painful honesty can be spoken without the entire relationship immediately becoming a battlefield. Otherwise, Sumit may simply become better at hiding next time. And that would be even worse. They need a marriage where somebody can say, I am scared this is not working, before fear turns into paperwork. They need to be able to discuss separation as a fear without using it as a weapon. They need to talk about what happens when Sumit shuts down. They need to talk about what happens when Jenny becomes anxious. They need to talk about family boundaries. And most importantly, they need to figure out what made Sumit believe divorce was a realistic option in the first place. Because if they do not answer that, the paperwork is just a symbol. Next time, maybe there are no documents. Maybe Sumit withdraws for days. Maybe Jenny starts preparing herself emotionally. Maybe one of them packs a bag after another argument. The form can change. The underlying problem does not. And family involvement would probably become even more sensitive. Jenny might start questioning every private conversation Sumit has with relatives. That would be understandable, but dangerous. Because if Jenny starts demanding to know everything Sumit tells his family, Sumit may feel controlled. Then he may become even more secretive. And once again, both people create the behavior they are afraid of. Jenny is afraid of being excluded, so she pushes for more access. Sumit is afraid of losing emotional freedom, so he hides more. Jenny discovers more secrecy and becomes even more convinced she needs access. That is how trust turns into monitoring. And monitoring is not intimacy. If they are going to recover, Sumit cannot spend the rest of the marriage proving every day that he is not planning to leave. Jenny cannot spend the rest of the marriage checking whether he is. That would make both of them miserable. The only real solution would be rebuilding enough emotional safety that neither person feels forced into those roles. And that takes us to the final power shift. Sumit began this fictional story believing the big decision belonged to him. Could he continue the marriage? Did he want divorce? Could love overcome everything else? He privately considered those questions. He privately explored the answer. And he privately decided Jenny was still what he wanted. But then, Jenny finds out. Now the decision is no longer Sumit's. Jenny has one of her own. Can she stay with a man who came this close to leaving without letting her know how serious things had become? That is the twist Sumit may not have prepared for. He was worried about whether he wanted the marriage. Now he has to worry about whether Jenny still does. And that changes their entire emotional balance. Because when you secretly evaluate your partner, you create the possibility that your partner will eventually evaluate you. Jenny now has to decide what matters more. The fact that Sumit ultimately stayed, or the fact that he apparently got far enough into considering divorce that paperwork existed before Jenny ever heard the truth from him? Does choosing Jenny at the end erase the secrecy that came before it? I do not think it automatically does. But I also do not think Sumit questioning the marriage automatically makes him a villain. That is what makes this fictional story interesting. Sumit's mistake may not be having doubts. Everybody has doubts. His mistake may be allowing those doubts to become practical enough that Jenny discovered the possible end of her marriage through paperwork instead of through her husband. Jenny's challenge is equally difficult. She can decide that betrayal is too deep and walk away. Or she can stay. But if she stays, she cannot use this discovery as permanent evidence in every future argument. If she does, the marriage is technically together but emotionally finished. Sumit cannot keep saying, "But I chose you," every time Jenny feels hurt. And Jenny cannot keep demanding proof that he is still choosing her. They would need a new relationship after this, not the old relationship patched together. A new one with different rules about difficult conversations, different boundaries around family, different ways of handling space, different ways of handling fear, and a very clear understanding that if either person reaches the point of seriously considering divorce again, the other partner cannot be the last person to know. Because that is the part Jenny may never forget. Not the word divorce, not the document, not even the possibility that Sumit wanted out. It is the feeling that everybody else, including Sumit himself, may have known her marriage was in danger before she did. That is a trust wound. And trust wounds do not disappear because somebody says, "Never mind, I changed my mind." That is why I think the biggest future conflict would not be whether Sumit files anything. It would be whether Jenny believes him when he says everything is okay. Every quiet moment could trigger the memory. Every serious disagreement could reopen it. And if Sumit becomes defensive about Jenny's fear, she may feel even less secure. So even if the divorce disappears, the marriage is not automatically saved. That is the biggest takeaway. The document is dramatic. The secrecy is painful. But neither one is the deepest problem. The deepest problem is how two married people apparently reached completely different understandings of how close they were to the end. Sumit believed he could privately explore leaving and then privately choose to stay. Jenny believes she had the right to know the marriage was ever being evaluated that seriously. Sumit focuses on where he ended up. Jenny focuses on everything he did before he got there. And that is the debate. Was Sumit wrong because he considered divorce? No. Was Jenny wrong for feeling devastated that she discovered it this way? Absolutely not. The real question is whether Sumit crossed the line between private doubt and private decision-making. Because once he did, Jenny stopped being his partner in the most important conversation their marriage could possibly have. And now the irony is almost impossible to miss. Sumit may have started researching divorce because he wanted to know whether he still wanted Jenny. But by doing that secretly, he may have handed Jenny the biggest reason she has ever had to question whether she still wants Sumit. So if you were Jenny, what would you do? Would you look at the final outcome and say, "He considered leaving, but when it mattered, he chose me"? Or would you look at the hidden process and say, "The moment my husband got this close to ending our marriage without telling me, something between us changed permanently"? And even if you forgave Sumit, could you ever hear him say, "Everything is fine"? Again, without wondering what he might be deciding when you are not in the room. Because Sumit may have stopped the divorce before it began, but the trust problem he created could be much harder to stop. This story is fictional for entertainment/commentary purposes.